San Diego business titan Qualcomm announces thousands of layoffs and a massive cost-cutting move. A judge said UC San Diego failed to provide a student charged with sexual assault a fair trial. The infrastructure of the city's crown jewel is crumbling. Will the little-known Balboa Park Conservancy save the day? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, a reporter Dean Calbreth of the San Diego Daily Transcript. Hi, Dean.
Hi.
Good to see you back again. Tony Perry, San Diego Bureau Chief for the Los Angeles Times. Hey, Tony.
Hey.
And KPBS Arts and Culture reporter Angela Caron. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Mark.
Glad to have you back on today. Well, the big news this week came from San Diego tech giant Qualcomm. A period of rapid growth halted this year, and Qualcomm is suddenly engaged in major belt tightening. Dean Calbreth is going to tell us all about that, but there's a little news we want to get to first with the Daily Transcript. Your paper, after 130 years, announced it's folding.
Yes, it did. Yeah, you know, we're one of the 10 oldest businesses in San Diego, oldest existing businesses.
And what was the word down from the owners of what the reason was?
The word from our publisher, he wrote a letter about this, is that it was increasing overhead, healthcare costs, and the uncertainty of what's happening in the news business.
News business, okay. And how many folks are, how many in the newsroom anyway?
There are about a dozen in the newsroom.
Okay.
I couldn't give the numbers for the whole business.
All right, and they've got some property downtown. What's likely to happen there?
I think they're likely to be sold.
Yeah,
I think that they're already real estate interests looking at the building.
All right. Well, it's just another casualty in the news business, and we've certainly been seeing those over the years. All of us have been directly affected by those. And best luck to you and all of your colleagues down there. Well, we are going to get on to another company, a much bigger company here, Qualcomm. Of course, this week they announced layoffs. We'll get to the why behind all of that, but Dean, start us off with what were the specifics on this announcement with Qualcomm?
Okay, the specifics were that they are going to lay off 15% of their workforce worldwide. They've got about 31,000 people, so that translates to about 4,700 people that would be laid off. You know, not all in San Diego, of course.
About half, maybe, in San Diego?
Yeah, I think they're still working that out.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, and they are a huge employer here, so if they lose that amount of money, amount of people, they've still got a significant presence. That having been said, one of the things that they're thinking of doing is splitting their the business that does microchips versus their R&D business. Mm-hmm. And that's been debated for a long time. The microchip business is going kind of south these days, fewer sales, and also they're facing antitrust suits over the collusion between these two divisions and everything. European Union has just joined a lawsuit that was started out in South Korea and then went to China and everything. Now the European Union is chiming in. So this has been problematic for them. So, you know, their investors, one big investor in particular, is saying, hey, you should split this business off.
Right. Now I want to get to more about that and some of the reasons behind this. I should do a little housekeeping here. Full disclosure, Qualcomm co-founder Irwin Jacobs has long been a major supporter of KPBS. So they were, as we said at the open, a high-flying company in recent years, and it's all, I don't know if it's screeching to a halt, but it's certainly slowing down dramatically. What are the major factors behind this downturn for Qualcomm?
Well, there's a lot of growing competition. There are these suits that I've mentioned that have been cropping up, which means, you know, once government prevails, first in South Korea, then in China, that means less revenue coming in from that area. So revenues have been declining, and they've been declining in the microchip business in general because there's so many microchips out there these days. Mm-hmm. You know, and Qualcomm has competition from lower cost manufacturers.
All right, and you go ahead, Angela.
And aren't some companies, cell phone companies, doing it in-house now, developing the microchips? Didn't Samsung do that, and that's become...
Right, yes, and Samsung is a big player here. You know, the largest microchip producer in the world is Intel. Second largest is Samsung. Third largest is Qualcomm. And Samsung's trying to become even larger now by doing a lot of more stuff in-house.
What's the thinking? That when Irwin took his hands off the controls, things started going south, or does it not boil down that way?
Qualcomm has had a history of developing businesses that it does spin off. It once used to manufacture cell phones, the actual cell phones themselves, which, that has gone away long ago. It once had the operations of bringing in cell phone providers, offering services cheap. That was spun off as Leap Wireless, which now is owned by AT&T. So it has spun off these businesses before. The question is whether this spin-off makes sense.
And you touched.
Is this a sort of panic-driven, quarter-to-quarter, what Hillary calls quarter-to-quarter journalism, or capitalism, or is the decline of Qualcomm a trend that probably sees no correction?
There's the third possibility that it makes sense, and yet they are going to recover, whatever. But that's a real open question for debate right now. One investor, Jana Partners, is saying that they really need to spin this body off, and they have gained enough power to convince the board to put some of their members on the board, to convince them to see their things their way. But there are a lot of people who don't buy that, and you've seen that with the stock price. The stock price is now, at its lowest point in a year, I think because of this dispute. It's been driven down a little bit by this dispute, which started boiling up around April or so.
Is this the end of Qualcomm as a very good full-time employer? Is the future now, as it is in some other industries, contractors, 6-month contract, no benefits, no security?
And they are cutting as some top paid employees goodies for them too.
Right, they are cutting a lot of their contractors as part of this. They call them part-time workers. We think of part-time workers as people at McDonald's or something. They're part-time workers making hundreds of thousands of dollars as consultants. Right. So they are cutting some of those workers. I don't think it necessarily means the end of Qualcomm, but there is some concern. Both from the critics of this move, who think that they should be keeping their microchip business, as well as from the people who have been pushing this move, who say this is the only way to preserve them.
All right, I wanted to get into the impact on San Diego. A lot, of course, our audience is concerned about that. On Evening Edition of KPBS last night, Eric Bruvald of National University talked about employees who will be laid off, what they can expect. Let's hear that bite.
The technology industry as a whole has seen robust job growth, lots of help-wanted ads, lots of constraints in terms of the labor force. So the people that are going to be affected by this layoff are likely going to have other opportunities within San Diego or even just outside, maybe in the rest of California, where they'll be able to earn just as much.
All right, you agree with that? These engineers are going to land on their feet, are they?
Probably, yeah. They might not get the cushy positions that they might currently have. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of demand for engineers out there.
They won't be looking for jobs in journalism, I know that. Angela, I wanted to turn to you for a moment. Qualcomm's been a huge benefactor to the arts in San Diego and all. We're going to see some belt tightening there as well?
Yeah, well, that's my question for Dean, actually. Yeah. I mean, so much of what I cover is the nonprofit sector. Mm-hmm. I mean, how is this going to play out for Qualcomm gives a lot of money to this, and their employees at the upper echelons that are going to be leaving give a lot of money to nonprofits and philanthropy in this town. What do you think the impact's going to be there?
Well, a lot of the impact on philanthropy is not going to be changed because a lot of it is specifically the Jacobs family. Mm-hmm. So, they've got their own wealth. That's right. Not going to alter. The question of what happens to them as a corporate entity, I think right now they're interested in belt tightening, and I think that might have an impact on their philanthropic. Yeah.
We should say a couple seconds left here. They still are an enormously powerful player internationally in
Absolutely.
This field, though. I mean,
Absolutely.
We shouldn't discount that. And, this may be just a hiccup, a bump in the road, and, they come back leaner and meaner.
And like I say, they have done these kind of spin-offs before. The question is this spin-off, does this make financial sense?
Okay. All right, we will shift gears now. Sexual assaults on college campuses spurred a crackdown by academic authorities in recent years. California even passed the nation's first yes means yes law. But now a Superior Court ruling in San Diego may bolster those who say that some colleges are going too far to punish the accused. Tony, start with this UC San Diego case. Give us the high points of what happened there in 2014.
Sure. My colleague Teresa Watanabe, who covers higher education for the LA Times, has been covering this issue and came down here for this rather startling Superior Court decision in which he agreed with a young man who had been
the judge, yeah.
Who had been the judge agreed with the young man who said he had been treated unfairly, been subjected to a kangaroo court at UC San Diego when he was accused by a woman, a young woman on campus that he had been seeing, of assaulting her, and they suspended him. And when he appealed, they suspended him some more, and he sued. And Joel Pressman, the Superior Court judge, agreed that his rights were violated and that there was no due process and it was a totally unfair system. Now, this is not the only place. Again, Teresa Watanabe quoted someone from the National Women's Law Center who said colleges across the country are struggling on how to balance the rights of the accused and the rights of someone to bring an accusation if they have been harmed. And we've seen cases at this campus, San Diego State. We've seen cases at the University of San Diego, different details and dealt with differently. It's happening across the country. Universities are trying to figure this out. The Department of Education is probing colleges, number of UC campuses, Stanford, to see how they're doing. On the other hand, there are some 40-plus lawsuits by mostly men who feel they were treated unfairly by these systems. So it is the topic, complex, controversial, and it's not going away soon.
And Angela, you did a two-part series for KPBS about, Tony mentioned the cases here at San Diego State, and you focused on one in particular here. And nobody says that the system is perfect. It's very difficult to handle these cases. And first of all, what are some of the elements that lead to these sexual assaults and accusations of sexual assaults and these whole situations that these young folks find themselves in?
Well, it's like on many college campuses. There are parties, there's drinking, there's kind of hookup culture, and then there's miscommunication. Assaults take place.
Kids aren't very experienced with either drinking or maybe even sexual relationships. They're young.
Exactly. They're first time away from home. There's this period of time called the red zone that, especially for freshmen, the first couple of months of school, where campus police will see a spike in these kinds of assaults because they're away from home for the first time. They're going to parties and they're inexperienced with alcohol and things happen. And so, it is a real problem. And
the witnesses have all been drinking too.
The witnesses have all been drinking, and sometimes sometimes people do report right away, but other times it can take months for a young woman or a young man to come forward and say that this has happened to them.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because in the LA Times reporting on this, they noted that the accuser here in this particular case at UCSD took 4 months to file the complaint, which, as you say, is not that unusual, and also that some witnesses were kind of all over the map on exactly what they saw had happened here.
In terms of how much drinking had gone on, who did what, to whom and where. There were 3 causes of action, as I understand it from Teresa Watanabe's story. In 2, the administrative individual involved found them unsubstantiated, but on the 3rd found that indeed the young man had assaulted the young woman. Now, he was not allowed during this proceeding to question his accuser, which is kind of a basic of due process. Right, he wasn't able to see certain documents. Right, yeah. The question, I guess, is should these cases be handled internally at the university, or should you call in the cops? Right. In this case, the city of San Diego sex cops who deal with this kind of thing in all sorts of settings. Should they be brought in?
And Angela, I want to get your take on that in 1 second, but in your reporting in the story I mentioned for KPBS, you did talk via Skype with Joe Cohn, the policy director of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, about college campuses dealing with this. Let's hear what he said, and then we'll get back to your response on that.
Especially when they're trying to do this without the benefit of forensics evidence, without the benefit of years of expertise, and without the benefit of the tools that law enforcement professionals and courts bring to bear to sort out fact and fiction. Expecting them to do this well is crazy.
Right. So you were going to elaborate on Tony's point there.
Well, I think there are a number of things that, the fact of the matter is that schools are being forced by the feds to do this work, right? And what it started out as this kind of like, this will be a teachable moment, how to handle Yeah, and what's happened is as these cases never go to criminal proceedings, now these campus hearings are the place where any kind of punishment actually takes place or is expected to take place. And so they're just not equipped to handle it. And I think there are some things that they can do to improve the process that they have in place, but Tony is exactly right. I mean, there are some people calling for a real formalization of the process, for this to look a lot more like a kind of criminal proceedings where the two parties each have attorneys, where some people are saying that the burden of proof should be changed. In a criminal court, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Within a college campus hearing, it's a preponderance of evidence, which means the evidence shows that more likely than not this happened. And some say that's stacked very much against the accused. So maybe that burden of proof should change.
Yeah. And at Harvard, some 40 law professors signed a protest saying, there's no due process in our system here. What are we doing? We're a higher education institution that should do better, and there were some changes made. I guess long ago there was a phrase that schools were in loco parentis, that is to say, the parents aren't here, we're in charge now. Well, parents don't run things with due process, but I think those days are gone, and now we do run things with lawyers everywhere and investigators from the federal government. So again, as Teresa quoted someone from National Women's Law Center, struggling colleges from coast to coast. How do you balance the rights? How do you deal with the federal government? How do you deal with lawyers in the courts? And we'll see whether this decision here by Judge Pressman in the UC San Diego case sets not a legal precedent, but rather gives an indication to other judges in other places or other litigants in other places that due process has to be part of this process.
But I think there are things that the schools can be doing to improve the process they have in place. So like, campus investigators could get more training, right? And I think the thing that's interesting about the UCSD case is I think the woman that investigated is an attorney. And sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes it's someone, with a PhD, someone who's very, administratively experienced, but not necessarily have a lot of legal background. More training for the judicial officers who run this. These are professors, they are people from campus life, more and more training for them. More communication with both parties and more timely communication. We hear time and time again about how they're not getting the information that they need. Left in the dark, right? All these, and this is relatively new that these schools are under the gun on this issue. So they're trying to perfect it, and they do have a role. They can move an accused person out of the class schedule of, say, the victim until this gets worked out. There are ways that they can improve the experience of both parties until they figure out what's going on, until they fully investigate.
But at UCSD, they were looking, once it was appealed a couple of times within the House, they were looking to put him out long enough to where you would have to apply to get back in.
That was such an odd decision. The fact that they made that after he appealed as a kind of, to sort of punish him for appealing, it seems, or it suggests. I don't know if that's what happened, but that was an odd move.
Well, what's interesting is, and all of us who've been to college know that drinking and men pressing their attentions on unwilling women is not new. Been going on a long time. So they're trying to deal now in the modern world with a situation that's been around, maybe in a lesser degree, but it's around now, and good luck on it.
Well, we're going to move on. I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more stories on this. This is not an issue that's going to be resolved anytime soon. Well, Balboa Park has for more than a century been described as the jewel in the heart of San Diego, but neglected and careworn might be better descriptions these days. Peeling paint, falling moldings, an ancient water main system all need attention right now. The city of San Diego, the park's landlord, has neither the money nor the means to deal with needed repairs, so enter the Balboa Park Conservancy. Angela, start by telling us what the Conservancy is and what their mission is, how long they've been around.
The Conservancy has been around for about 5 years, and they were set up to be the private arm, the caretaking arm of the city's, the private arm to caretake of the park along with the city. So the city has public dollars, obviously, to put into the park. They are the city's landlord, and the Conservancy is to raise money, private dollars, to both improve the park and work towards its sustainability.
Then Mayor, the former Mayor Jerry Sanders was the fellow who announced in 2010, "Hey, we can't do this. We got to lean on the wealthy folks here and try and do something about it." Does the city just? There's not enough money. We love the park. Everybody calls it the jewel, as I said at the open, but we really don't want to tax and spend anything to save it.
Well, we all know the budget crisis that the city was, especially around that time in the recession. So, I mean, there wasn't a lot of money going around for sure. But I think they also just thought it was a good idea. They were looking to what other cities were doing. And, for example, the Central Park Conservancy was a real model for them, as it has been
in
for
New York,
parks.
Of course, yeah.
Right, in New York. It has been for cities across the country setting up these conservancies. And this idea of this public-private partnership is really in vogue right now. The idea is that the private side can move donors and their passions to things that need to get done in the park. And municipal dollars, as we all know, are limited, they're stretched, they come with legal requirements. They're not always the answer. I think the fears around these partnerships, in the case of Balboa Park, for example, might be something like, I've heard people say, well, it's going to turn into like Petco Park, where there'll be billboards and you'll have the Sempra lily pond, everything will be sponsored. Yeah, so without that government watchdog, what will this look like? I don't know, but I think that it's still too early to tell. Even though they've been around for 5 years, it's really early to tell.
It does seem that, well, you're right, these private-public are in vogue. Central Park is the greatest example. There is a San Diego-ness about this. Here we are again. Champagne aspirations, but we don't want to pay more than a six-pack of beer. I mean, we are a libertarian theme park, as I have said many times. Here we go again. Depending on the kindness of others and our rich people, 1-800-CALL Irwin Jacobs. Yeah. I mean, this is pitiful, is it not, for a large city to be at this point? And this is not the only thing. Our streets, the same. We'll fix some of them, but let's not have a bond. Let's not do that. I mean, here we go again.
I actually spoke with folks at the Central Park Conservancy this morning for a long time, and we were talking about this. And one of the new CEO of the Conservancy has said, they're going to be raising money around certain things. The infrastructure needs, the water main system, for example, that's the kind of thing that the city, in his words, most cities take on these infrastructure things. That's what that will be in their ballpark. Or whatever, they'll be in charge of that. So, but the Conservancy in New York was telling me, Central Park, that they actually won't rely on the city, the municipality, to raise money for their sewer system. They go to donors for that because they can't rely on the city. So it's not just us. But I know what you mean.
There's some grandiose in which we compare ourselves to New York and Central Park. I mean, the Dakota looking over Central Park with Yoko Ono and the rest of them. They've got more money.
They do.
Those folks.
Yeah, they launched with the James Taylor concert.
We have some rich widows, and I'm sure they're on a list somewhere, and we're trying to seduce them. But really,
well, speaking of the money, and of course, the head of the organization you mentioned. Tell us his name.
Tomas Herrera Mischler is his name.
And he's from where?
He comes from Buffalo. Actually, he took over the Olmsted Parks Conservancy there, and actually turned it around. I mean, it was tons of graffiti, brown lawns, the whole thing, and again, public private partnership, and they raised lots of money and transformed it. My mom was living in Buffalo at the time, and she said they did amazing work. And so now he's here.
Well, all right. We said at the open it's taken 5 years. He hasn't been here that long, but we do have a clip from him from your piece about what the deliberate pace is about and what his priorities are.
I've been dealing with historic landscapes for a long time, and they're never done. You always have something you need to do, especially landscapes are living. They're changing all the time. Plants grow, they die, they change, and so there's always a lot of very careful thinking that has to go into every project. That's why, we can't rush into any project. It has to be very carefully thought through.
All right, we've got about 90 seconds left. I did want to ask you, there are other private groups that are raising money and have been around for a long time. How do they play into the Conservancy in this newer group?
Yeah, so like the Friends of Balboa Park, for example, Committee of 100, they also raise private dollars for projects in the park. And they are all hoping to collaborate. I mean, they've talked a lot about that they're going to partner up, and we'll see. But it is interesting. The differences between the groups, when you ask them, they'll say they're all very different, but they're subtle and confusing.
Is this the son of Balboa Centennial? Remember how that ended up? I mean, are we once again trying for something that's just Impossible.
Well, but this has to happen. That party,
right.
you know, it'd be nice, didn't it? But this has to happen here. Now, let's talk a little bit about the scope of the estimates range as high as 300 million in repairs that are needed here.
Oh, they range as high as, some say 500 million, some say beyond that.
Wow.
But, you know, it's difficult to actually pin that down. Yeah. I've asked so many people, where does that number come from? And they can't tell you.
Okay.
And I've heard some people say from within the city that number, it's not even close to that.
That's half a football stadium.
So I've tried to get a list. I've filed multiple public records requests to get an actual list. And I've seen one from 2009, but I can't seem to get an updated one. So we'll see. Okay,
and any real quick, a few seconds list, any goal? Do they have 300, 400, 500 million goal for the Conservancy to raise? Or?
They're raising $3 million for the Botanical Building for their big first project. Obviously, you know, big iconic building. It's a good fundraising project.
And then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Dean Calvert of the San Diego Daily Transcript, Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times, and Angela Corona of KPBS News. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.